She walked through the school gates, adjusting the strap of her backpack. The morning sun was bright, but it did little to lighten the heaviness she felt inside. Every step down the crowded hallways felt like walking through a storm of whispers, snickers, and pointed fingers. She tried to keep her head down to avoid the eyes that followed her, but she could feel the judgment in the air. She had been here many times before, but somehow, each day felt harder than the last. In the cafeteria, the usual group of students sat waiting. They had been targeting her for months, mocking her weight and calling her names behind their hands or on social media. Some days it was just words, but other days it was shoves in the hallway, spills on her books, or videos posted online meant to humiliate her. She had learned to endure it quietly, to let the laughter roll off her back, but it wasn't easy. The constant reminder of being different weighed on her more than she cared to admit. She found her usual spot at a corner table, away from the main crowd. She unpacked her lunch slowly, keeping her eyes down as she tried to enjoy her food, but she could feel them staring. A group of girls at the next table giggled and exchanged glances, whispering something she knew was about her. One of them even leaned over. "Watch this," she said, smirking. They started a game of pushing her boundaries, throwing small insults, laughing when she flinched. Each word pierced her, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of crying or yelling back. Despite the humiliation, she focused on what mattered most: surviving the day. Classes came and went, but the bullies found ways to make her life miserable everywhere she went. Hallways, classrooms, even outside during breaks, no space felt safe. Sometimes she wondered if it would ever end, if she would always be the target, the girl who everyone assumed was weak and easy to push around. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on her studies and her own goals, but the constant pressure was exhausting. After school, she walked home slowly, trying to process the day. The laughter and whispers followed her in her mind, each insult replaying itself over and over. She felt frustration rising inside her, a mix of anger and sadness. She wanted to fight back, to show them that she was not as weak as they thought, but she also knew that losing control could make things worse. She needed to find a way to channel that anger into strength, to turn it into something that could protect her rather than hurt her. When she reached her apartment, she set her backpack down and took a deep breath. The space was small but comforting. The smell of the cooking from the morning still lingered faintly in the kitchen. She walked over to her small gym bag tucked in the corner and pulled out her boxing gloves. They were worn and soft from hours of training, but they carried a weight of confidence she couldn't get anywhere else. Lacing them up, she felt a rush of determination. This was her time, her space, her way to regain control. She moved to the punching bag in the middle of the room and raised her hands in a defensive stance. Her reflection in the mirror stared back at her, a reminder of both her struggles and her potential. She imagined the bullies at school, the fear they thought they instilled, and she let it fuel her movements. Jab, cross, hook, pivot. Each strike, each dodge, each step was deliberate, a way to train her body and mind. She wasn't angry. She was focused. She wasn't out to humiliate anyone, but she was determined to prepare herself for any situation. Her boxing training had begun years ago as a way to protect herself, to feel safe when the world seemed cruel. Over time, it became more than that. It became a way to channel frustration, to build confidence, and to remind herself of her own value. She trained regularly, entering local competitions quietly and winning matches with skill that no one at school knew about. Her small victories in the gym were hers alone, a secret source of pride that made the insults from school feel less heavy. She practiced combinations she had learned from her coach. Left jab, right cross, uppercut, step, pivot, repeat. Her movements were precise and fluid. The sweat on her brow and the ache in her muscles were proof of her effort. Each session strengthened more than her body. It strengthened her mind, her confidence, and her sense of control. She imagined herself facing anyone who tried to push her around. And each time she visualized herself staying calm, moving with skill and not letting fear dictate her actions. After an hour of intense training, she sank onto the floor exhausted but satisfied. Her heartbeat slowed as she drank water and wiped sweat from her face. She had trained hard, but she felt lighter, more in control, more ready to face the world outside the gym. Boxing wasn't just a skill. It was a shield, a source of empowerment, and a constant reminder that she was stronger than the world sometimes gave her credit for. She sat quietly for a few minutes, reflecting on the days at school, the bullying, the whispers, the shoves, They were all part of the world she had to navigate. But she realized that she didn't have to navigate it helplessly. She had tools, skills, and inner strength that no one could take away. She could face challenges head-on and remain calm, confident, and prepared. Her boxing wasn't about hurting others. It was about controlling herself, protecting her dignity, and asserting her boundaries. Her parents supported her, though they didn't always understand the intensity of her training. They knew it made her happy and gave her confidence, and they trusted her judgment. Sometimes they worried when she came home bruised or tired, but they also knew the importance of discipline and focus in her life. Their quiet support was a reminder that she was not alone, that strength could coexist with love, and that she could rely on her family for encouragement, even when others tried to tear her down. School continued to be a challenge, but she approached it differently now. She walked with her head held a little higher, shoulders back, eyes forward. She was still the target for whispers and stares, but she was learning to let them slide, to remain focused on her own goals. She discovered that strength was not about fighting with words or aggression. It was about preparation, patience, and resilience. She had learned to turn her anger into motivation, her fear into focus, and her pain into a source of power that no one could diminish. Her friends, a small but loyal group, noticed her quiet transformation. They admired her focus and determination, and they respected the strength she had built for herself. Together, they created a small circle of support, a place where she could feel safe, be herself, and share her victories and struggles without judgment. Their encouragement reminded her that strength was not only physical, it was also emotional and relational. One afternoon, she faced another minor incident at school. A group of students mocked her in the hallway, trying to provoke a reaction. She took a deep breath, remembered her training, and kept walking. Instead of reacting with fear or anger, she remained composed, moving with confidence and self-assurance. The bullies, expecting a display of weakness, were met with calm and control instead. Her response was quiet but powerful, a message that she was no longer an easy target, and that her strength extended far beyond what they could see. Later that evening, she returned home and trained once more. She practiced punches, footwork, and defensive movements, each strike reinforcing her focus and resilience. She imagined potential confrontations, visualizing herself moving with precision, calmness, and strategy. Each session built not only her physical strength, but also her confidence in her ability to handle whatever challenges came her way. She realized that true power came from preparation, discipline, and self-belief, and she embraced these lessons fully. The days went by, each one a blend of school challenges and private training. The bullying continued, but it lost some of its impact. She had learned to stand firm, to face adversity with calmness, and to trust in her own strength. The confidence she carried became visible in her posture, her movements, and her interactions with others. She was no longer defined by their cruelty. She was defined by her dedication, skill, and resilience. At night, she reflected on her journey so far. She thought about how far she had come, from a girl who feared every glance and whisper to someone capable of facing challenges with strength and control. She understood that her power was not about dominating others, but about mastering herself, asserting her boundaries, and remaining composed in the face of adversity. Each day of training, each moment of reflection, and each act of courage reinforced the person she was becoming, a strong, resilient, and confident individual capable of facing the world on her own terms. By the time she drifted off to sleep, a sense of calm and purpose settled over her. She had learned that strength was more than muscles. It was discipline, focus, courage, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. She was no longer just surviving. She was preparing, growing, and transforming herself. And as she closed her eyes, she felt ready to face whatever challenges the next day might bring, knowing that she carried a power inside her that no one could take away. Write Part 1. In 1,400 words without heading. In simple English words in a separate document. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. After the latest humiliation at school, she walked home slowly, feeling the weight of the day pressing on her shoulders. The laughter and whispers of the other students echoed in her mind. but she kept her head down and tried not to cry. Inside, though, a spark of determination was growing. She had spent so many years letting the world see her as weak, but she knew that wasn't the truth. She knew she had a side of herself that no one at school had ever seen, a side that was strong and capable. When she finally reached her neighborhood, she took a deep breath and unlocked the door to her apartment. Inside, the small but cozy space smelled faintly of the cooking she had done earlier that morning. She set her backpack down and sat on the worn couch, staring at the floor for a few long minutes. She thought about the insults, the shoves, the laughter, and a familiar feeling rose in her chest, a mix of anger and resolve. She wasn't going to let anyone decide her worth anymore. Not now, not ever. She moved to the small gym bag she had tucked in the corner of the living room. Opening it, she pulled out her boxing gloves, wrapped her hands carefully, and laced them tight. The gloves were worn, the leather soft from countless hours of training, but they carried her confidence. Putting them on, she felt the familiar sense of control, a power that no one could take away from her. This was her sanctuary, her secret, her way to fight back, not with words, but with skill and strength. She walked to the small mirror in the corner of the room, gloves raised in a defensive stance. Her reflection stared back at her, and for a moment she imagined the bullies at school. She imagined them smirking, thinking she was too weak to defend herself. Then with a controlled exhale, she began her routine. Jab, cross, hook, step, pivot, jab again. Her movements were fluid, practiced, precise. Each punch, each dodge, each movement reminded her of the hours she had spent building herself, block by block, strike by strike. The punching bag in the middle of the room was battered, but she loved it. It bore witness to her struggles, her victories, and her growth. She unleashed a series of combinations, each punch faster and harder than the last. She imagined a scenario where someone bigger, meaner, tried to push her around, and she knew she could stop them. She felt her muscles burn, her heartbeat rise, but she didn't stop. This was more than exercise. It was preparation. She was preparing not just her body, but her mind. Boxing had become a lifeline for her. It started years ago as a way to defend herself, to feel safer in a world that could be cruel. But over time it had become so much more. It was her confidence, her therapy, and her identity. While others judged her by the size of her body, the color of her skin, or the way she carried herself, she had discovered a side of herself that no one could see unless she chose to show it. She had become disciplined, focused, and fearless in ways that surprised even her sometimes. After an hour of intense training, she sank onto the floor, sweating and breathing hard. Her heart was still racing, but a smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. This was her world, her escape from the cruelty she faced outside these walls. She knew the bullies at school would never guess that behind her quiet demeanor was someone who could move with speed, strength, and precision. That knowledge was satisfying in a quiet, private way. After cooling down, she sat at the small kitchen table, sipping water and thinking. Boxing wasn't just about hitting or defending herself. It had taught her patience, strategy, and respect. She had learned to read her opponent, to anticipate, and to react. These were lessons she could carry beyond the ring. They weren't just physical skills. They were life skills. She knew that if she ever had to confront the bullies, she could do so without letting her emotions control her. She could act with clarity, confidence, and strength. Even though she trained in secret, she had started to participate in local competitions. Small events, mostly for experience, but each match helped her grow. Winning wasn't the only goal. It was proving to herself that she could trust her strength, that she could rise above the fear and the doubt that sometimes crept into her mind. Each victory, each hard-fought match reminded her that the power she carried was real. It wasn't about looking tough. It was about being prepared, about believing in herself when no one else did. Her parents supported her, though they didn't always fully understand the world of boxing. They knew it made her happy, that it gave her confidence, and they trusted her discipline. Sometimes, when she came home bruised or exhausted, they would worry, but they also knew how important it was to her. Their support was quiet, steady, like the walls of the apartment that sheltered her while she trained. They never questioned her ability. They only reminded her to stay safe and to respect herself. School was a different challenge entirely. Each day she faced whispers, pointed fingers, and the occasional shove. Some days it felt unbearable, but the thought of her boxing training kept her grounded. The bullies didn't know what they were dealing with, and part of her liked that. She wasn't looking to humiliate anyone, but she had learned that strength didn't need to be shown unless necessary. Her power was quiet, controlled, waiting for the right moment. That thought brought a sense of calm, even on the worst days. She also had a few friends who knew her secret and respected her for it. They didn't care about appearances or weight. They saw her determination and discipline. Talking with them reminded her that kindness and support could exist even in a hostile environment. It gave her hope that she could navigate school without letting the cruelty of others define her. With her friends and her training, she built a small world where she felt safe and strong. One evening, after another long day of school and training, she sat on her bed and reflected on how far she had come. The journey wasn't easy. There were days when the insults cut deep, when self-doubt crept in, and when the idea of fighting back seemed impossible. But she had learned that strength wasn't just about muscles. It was about heart, mind, and perseverance. She had learned to stand up for herself in her own way, to prepare for challenges, and to believe in her own worth. Her mind wandered back to the bullies. She thought about how they assumed she was weak and unworthy of respect. She thought about how easy it had been for them to mock her, how little they knew about the discipline, skill, and resilience she carried inside. She didn't feel hatred toward them, but she felt a quiet resolve. One day they would see that the person they underestimated was far stronger than they could imagine. At that moment, she realized that her journey wasn't just about fighting back. It was about growth, about self-discovery, about embracing who she was without apology. Boxing had given her a lens to see her own strength, to measure her own progress, and to know that she was capable of facing challenges that seemed insurmountable. It had given her confidence that no insult, no shove, and no whispered laugh could ever take away. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the streets below. The world outside her apartment could be harsh, unkind, and unfair, but she felt ready for it. She was not the same girl who had walked through school halls with her head down, fearing every look and whisper. She was someone who had fought for herself, who had trained in secret, and who had learned that real strength was quiet, patient, and deliberate. She had the power to protect herself, to assert her boundaries, and to carry herself with pride. As night fell, she prepared for sleep, but her mind remained active with thoughts of strategy and growth. She imagined different scenarios, ways she could stand up for herself and ways she could maintain her dignity in the face of cruelty. She thought about the next day at school, knowing the bullies would still be there, but feeling confident that she could face them in her own way. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone yet. She only needed to trust in her own preparation and strength. By the time she drifted off to sleep, a sense of calm and determination settled over her. The training, the discipline, the quiet moments of reflection, they all built her into someone stronger, someone capable, someone ready to take control of her own story. The bullying had not disappeared, but it no longer had the power to break her spirit. She knew that in her own time, on her own terms, she would face the challenges ahead and emerge stronger than anyone expected. And as she slept, the echoes of the school hallways faded into the distance. In her dreams, she was not the girl mocked and underestimated. She was the boxer, the fighter, the girl with strength in every movement, confidence in every thought, and resilience in every breath. She was ready for the world, even if the world wasn't ready for her. The next few weeks at school felt heavier than usual. Every time she walked down the hall, she felt the eyes of the bullies following her. They whispered, snickered, and sometimes bumped into her intentionally. Each incident was small, but together they formed a weight that pressed on her chest. She had learned to ignore them for the most part, to keep her focus on her classes, her friends, and her secret life at the gym. Yet no matter how strong she felt inside, the constant harassment began to wear on her. One morning, the bullying crossed a line. She had been sitting in the cafeteria, quietly eating her lunch, when one of the bullies shoved her tray onto the floor. Food scattered across the tiles, and laughter erupted around her. She froze, not out of fear, but because she hadn't expected it to escalate so suddenly. Her friends rushed over to help her clean up, but the damage was done. The humiliation was public, the embarrassment raw, and the laughter of the bullies echoed in her mind long after the cafeteria emptied. That night, she returned home, anger and frustration bubbling inside her. She knew the bullies would not stop unless something changed. She could feel the tension building in her chest, the need to stand up for herself growing stronger with every insult, every shove, every whisper. She sat quietly for a moment, letting the emotions flow. before reaching for her gym bag. The gloves were waiting, familiar and comforting. As she wrapped her hands, she thought about every insult she had endured, every moment of feeling powerless, and let it fuel her. The gym became her escape once more. She hit the punching bag with controlled precision, imagining the bullies as shadows moving across the floor. Jab, cross, hook, pivot. She moved with the rhythm of her training, each punch releasing some of the anger that had built up inside her. She didn't want to hurt anyone outside the gym, but she needed to reclaim her sense of control, to feel her strength again. This was her way of preparing for the inevitable moment when she could no longer remain passive. She had been keeping a record of her progress in a small notebook she carried in her gym bag. Every training session, every sparring match, every improvement in speed and power was logged. Looking back at the pages, she realized how far she had come. Her punches were faster, her footwork sharper, her endurance greater. She could see the transformation not just in her body, but in her mind. The girl who had once shrunk from attention had become someone capable, someone ready to face challenges head-on. A few days later, the bullies struck again, and this time it was personal. One of them had stolen a piece of jewelry that had sentimental value, a gift from her mother. It wasn't expensive, but it meant the world to her. She confronted the group in the hallway, demanding it back, but they only laughed. The sense of injustice burned in her chest. She felt something shift inside her, a quiet but powerful decision forming. She would no longer allow them to dictate how she felt or how she moved through the world. Something had to change. She started paying closer attention to the movements of the bullies, observing patterns, noticing the times and places they were likely to strike. This wasn't about planning revenge. It was about being prepared, about knowing when she might need to defend herself. She practiced at the gym with renewed focus, imagining different scenarios, visualizing how she could respond. Each day she became more confident in her ability to control a situation, to act with clarity rather than panic. Her friends noticed a subtle change as well. She walked with a steadier posture, spoke with more certainty, and no longer flinched when someone approached her unexpectedly. They encouraged her, telling her she was growing stronger not just physically but mentally. Their support became another source of strength, reminding her that she wasn't facing the world alone. Even though the bullies continued their harassment, she began to feel a sense of calm, knowing she had prepared herself for the moment when she could stand her ground. At home, she began to reflect on the idea of confrontation. She didn't want to become someone consumed by anger or revenge. She wanted to assert herself, to reclaim her dignity, to show that she could not be pushed around. Boxing had taught her control, and she reminded herself that control was key. She practiced breathing exercises, focusing her mind and visualizing herself responding with precision, not impulse. She knew that when the moment came, her strength would be most effective if it was measured and deliberate. One afternoon, the bullies cornered her after school near the parking lot. It wasn't a large group, but they looked confident, sure that she would back down. One of them stepped forward, mocking her weight, taunting her with cruel words. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but instead of fear, she felt calm and focused. Her training kicked in naturally. She stood tall, shoulders back, and met their eyes without hesitation. For the first time, they saw her not as an easy target, but as someone who was ready and capable. She didn't strike immediately. She assessed their movements, remembered the strategies she had practiced, and waited for the right moment. When one of them lunged, trying to push her, she shifted her weight, sidestepped, and used her agility to create space. Her actions were precise, controlled, and deliberate. She wasn't looking to humiliate anyone. She just wanted to assert herself and stop the attack. The bullies were caught off guard, their confidence wavering. Her friends, who had followed at a distance, watched in awe. They had known she was strong, but seeing her respond with such skill and control was remarkable. She didn't need to shout or scream to make her point. Her presence, her stance, and her movements spoke volumes. The bullies, who had thrived on intimidation and fear, now faced someone who would not be pushed over. They stepped back, unsure of how to react. After the encounter, she walked away without a backward glance. She didn't need to celebrate or gloat. The point had been made. She would no longer allow herself to be treated as weak. Each step she took away from the confrontation reinforced her sense of self-worth and her control over her own life. She knew that the bullies might try again, but now she had proven, to herself and to them, that she was prepared to stand her ground. That night, She trained longer than usual. She wanted to refine her skills, knowing that each day brought new challenges. She practiced defensive moves, footwork, and timing, imagining different scenarios that could occur at school. Her muscles ached, but the fatigue was satisfying. It was proof that she was growing stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She could feel her confidence solidifying with every jab, every pivot, every controlled movement. She also started thinking about the bigger picture. The bullies were only a part of the challenges she would face in life. If she could confront this situation with courage, skill, and self-control, she could face other obstacles with the same mindset. Boxing had become more than a sport or a hobby. It was a training ground for life itself. Each session taught her resilience, focus, and the importance of preparation. These lessons extended far beyond the gym, shaping her into someone capable of facing adversity with determination. Her parents noticed the change in her demeanor as well. She seemed calmer, more confident, and more focused. They asked about her day at school, and she answered honestly without dwelling on the bullies. She didn't want them to worry unnecessarily, but she also wanted to acknowledge her experiences. Their support, combined with her growing strength, created a sense of stability and reassurance that helped her navigate the challenges outside the gym. As the days passed, the bullying didn't completely stop, but it lost some of its power. She walked with her head held high, aware that she had control over her reactions and her choices. The bullies' attempts to intimidate her were no longer as effective, because she had discovered a source of strength that could not be shaken by words or small acts of aggression. She was becoming someone who could face the world on her own terms, someone who had the skill, discipline, and courage to protect herself. One afternoon, she received a message from one of the bullies, attempting to taunt her again. Instead of feeling fear or anger, she simply smiled, knowing that she was prepared for whatever came next. The message was a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had grown. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone else. It was about proving to herself that she could face challenges with confidence and control. She continued to train diligently, each session reinforcing her abilities and her mindset. Boxing had given her more than strength. It had given her clarity, focus, and a sense of purpose. She was no longer just the girl being targeted at school. She was someone who had cultivated her skills, her discipline, and her inner resolve. She knew that the moment would come when she might need to assert herself more directly, but she was ready. When that day arrived, she would face it with confidence, precision, and strength. And in the quiet moments before sleep, she reflected on her journey. The bullying had been painful, humiliating, and exhausting, but it had also pushed her to discover a side of herself she might never have known otherwise. She had learned that real strength was not just about muscles or fighting. It was about preparation, discipline, and self-belief. The bullies had underestimated her, and that had become her advantage. She was no longer just reacting to the world. She was shaping her own path, guided by skill, courage, and determination. She drifted off to sleep that night with a sense of calm and purpose. The challenges at school would continue, but she knew she had the power to face them. She had built herself into someone capable, someone resilient, and someone ready to take control when the moment demanded it. The bullying was no longer the center of her story. It was just one obstacle among many that she was prepared to overcome, and with that thought she slept, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The day finally came when the tension that had been building for weeks reached its peak. She walked through the school gates with a quiet confidence that surprised even herself. The bullies were already there, leaning against the lockers, smirking as usual. Today felt different. She didn't feel fear, though she could feel her heartbeat quicken. Instead, she felt ready, like all the training, all the practice, and all the discipline had prepared her for this moment. As she moved down the hallway, the group of bullies stepped in front of her. Their laughter filled the space, sharp and cruel, trying to push her into a reaction. One of them leaned close, mocking her, expecting the same nervous smile or flinch she had shown in the past. But today she didn't move. She held her ground, her gaze steady, calm, and unshakable. For the first time, the bullies didn't see a scared girl. They saw someone who would not back down. "Think you can just walk by without answering us?" One of them sneered. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she assessed the situation, reading their movements as she had practiced at the gym. She noted who was the most aggressive, who tried to lead the group and how they positioned themselves. Her mind was clear, focused. She knew this was not about anger or revenge. It was about standing up for herself, asserting her boundaries and showing strength without losing control. One of the bullies shoved her shoulder, trying to provoke a reaction. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but instead of lashing out, she shifted her weight, pivoted slightly, and stepped to the side, letting his push miss its mark. The look of surprise on his face was unmistakable. He had expected resistance or fear, and instead she moved with confidence and control. The other bullies hesitated, uncertain how to react to someone who didn't fit their expectations. "You're not scared of us?" one of them asked, a mix of confusion and disbelief in their voice. She shook her head calmly. "No, you don't control me," she said, her voice steady. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority. She wasn't threatening them, but she was making it clear that she would not tolerate their behavior any longer. The hall, usually filled with whispers and laughter, felt different. The energy had shifted. People passing by glanced at the scene, sensing that something important was happening. The bullies, frustrated by her calm, tried to circle her, attempting to intimidate her through numbers. But she was prepared. She moved with agility, sidestepping, pivoting, and maintaining balance. Each step was deliberate, each movement measured. Her training kicked in naturally, allowing her to anticipate their motions and maintain control over the space around her. For the first time, she felt fully in command of the situation, not as someone reacting, but as someone leading with confidence. One of the bullies lunged, trying to push her again. She stepped back quickly, dodging his attempt and placing herself in a defensive stance. She raised her hands instinctively, a subtle reminder of the skills she had honed at the gym. The group froze for a moment, realizing that she was not an easy target. The girl they had underestimated, the one they thought was weak, was standing strong, alert, and unafraid. Her friends had followed at a distance, watching quietly. They felt a mix of awe and relief. They had seen her grow stronger in training, but seeing her face the bullies directly with control and focus was something else entirely. They could see the spark of the girl they knew, the one capable of defending herself and asserting her worth, shining brightly. "You really think you can handle us?" one of the bullies asked, trying to regain some authority. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she moved with precision, stepping to the side as another attempted to block her path. Her movements were controlled, not aggressive, but they sent a clear message. She was not intimidated, and she would not be pushed around. The bullies began to sense that their usual tactics, mockery, shoves, and whispers would no longer work. The standoff lasted only a few tense moments, but it felt longer. Each party assessed the other, testing boundaries. The girl's mind remained calm, her focus sharp. She thought about her training, the countless hours at the gym, the discipline, the strategy. This wasn't about violence. It was about asserting herself, showing that she had strength and control. Each subtle movement communicated confidence, skill, and readiness. Finally, the leader of the bullies tried a last attempt to intimidate her. He stepped closer, speaking louder, trying to regain dominance. She met his gaze, unflinching, and held her stance. Her calmness, her poise, and the subtle signs of her readiness were enough. The bully hesitated, unsure how to proceed. The confidence she exuded had shifted the power dynamic. The balance of control was no longer in their favor. Without a single punch thrown, without a shout, without a dramatic display, the moment had changed. The bullies began to retreat, unsure how to confront someone who was clearly in control. Their arrogance faltered, replaced by uncertainty. The girl didn't chase them or gloat. She simply stood tall, breathing steadily, knowing that she had asserted herself in the most powerful way, with confidence, composure, and skill. As the hallway emptied, she felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. This encounter was not about winning a fight. It was about reclaiming her space, asserting her boundaries, and showing that she would no longer be controlled by fear or cruelty. The bullies had underestimated her, and in doing so, they revealed the power she had cultivated all along. Later that day, she returned home and reflected on the events. Her muscles ached from tension and movement, but her mind was calm and clear. She had faced the situation with precision, control, and confidence. The feeling of empowerment was overwhelming. She realized that this moment was a turning point, not just in dealing with the bullies, but in understanding her own strength and potential. She went to the gym that evening, not because she needed to prepare for another encounter, but because training had become part of who she was. She practiced punches, footwork, and defensive maneuvers, each movement reinforcing her confidence. This wasn't about fighting someone else. It was about strengthening herself both physically and mentally. She felt grounded, capable, and in control. Her friends reached out to her later that night expressing admiration and pride. They had witnessed her courage, her skill, and her composure. Their support reinforced the idea that she was not alone, that she had allies, and that her growth had inspired those around her. She felt a sense of community and connection that she had not experienced before, a reminder that strength was not just about individual skill, but also about the support and respect of those who believed in her. The days that followed were different. The bullies still tried small acts of intimidation, but their power had diminished. They no longer laughed with confidence, no longer assumed she would flinch or back down. She walked through the halls with her head held high, her posture confident and her mind focused. The control she had asserted in that confrontation carried over into every aspect of her day. She was no longer defined by their cruelty. She was defined by her own strength, resilience, and determination. At home, she spent quiet moments reflecting on the lessons she had learned. The encounter had shown her the importance of preparation, discipline, and confidence. It had reinforced the value of self-control, strategic thinking, and resilience. She understood that real power was not about dominating others, but about mastering oneself, standing firm in the face of adversity, and asserting boundaries with clarity and confidence. Her parents noticed the change as well. She spoke more confidently, moved with purpose, and carried herself with a quiet strength that was impossible to ignore. They encouraged her, proud not only of her physical abilities but of her mental and emotional growth. Their pride and support became another layer of strength, reinforcing her confidence and her belief in her own abilities. The gym became more than a place to train. It became a sanctuary, a space where she could continue to grow, reflect, and strengthen herself. Each session reminded her of the power she carried, the discipline she had cultivated, and the resilience she had developed. Boxing was no longer just a skill. It was a foundation for her confidence, a source of empowerment, and a reminder that she was capable of facing whatever challenges life might present. As the evening drew to a close, she sat quietly in her room, thinking about the journey so far. The bullying had been painful, exhausting, and humiliating, but it had also revealed a strength she had never fully realized. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She had discovered that discipline, preparation, and self-belief were more powerful than intimidation or cruelty. And she had seen that confidence, when paired with skill and control, could change the dynamics of any situation. She prepared for sleep with a sense of calm and purpose. The confrontation had been resolved, and the bullies had lost their power over her. But more importantly, she had gained a deeper understanding of herself, her abilities, and her potential. She was no longer the girl who walked through school halls in fear. She was someone capable, resilient, and ready to face whatever came next. In the quiet moments before sleep, she reflected on her training, her growth, and the challenges she had overcome. She understood that life would continue to test her, but she was prepared. She had cultivated strength, discipline, and confidence that could not be taken away. And as she closed her eyes, she felt a profound sense of